And now for something completely machinima. Tracy Harwood. So I've done a little bit of digging around and I've discovered.
Ricky Grove. Fog comes in on little cat feet.
Phil Rice. This is the best film that I've seen all year and maybe ever.
Damien Valentine. Use the machinima, Luke.
Hey, everybody. This is a Now for Something Completely Machinima podcast. And we review all sorts of interesting machinima and real-time video-related technologies and news as well. My name is Ricky Grove. I'm your host this time. We're here with my friend Tracy Harwood.
Hello.
Phil Rice.
Hey there.
And Damien Valentine.
Hello.
We got 4 interesting and varied machinima and quasi-machinima coming up for you this month. And if you have anything, comments you'd like to make, you can contact us at talk@completelyMachinima.com. We do read them in between doing drugs and having sex, but we do read them. So our emphasis on other things there, and while we're partying at Machinima headquarters, but we do read them. So please send your comments and ideas in, your thoughts and your harangues as well. We do appreciate your criticizing each and every one of us, especially Phil, but we won't get into that. Now, we're going to talk about a machinima that I picked. And as you may know, if you've been following us, I've vowed about 6 months ago to spend a lot of time on archive.org, which has a big machinima collection in it. And I've been selecting a machinima from that collection. And I don't have a systematic method for doing it. I just go through, find interesting films and watch them. And as I was going through a list, I came across a film called The Days After by Pesch, who it suddenly occurred to me, it says, I remember making a movie with Pesch. And then as I started watching it, I realized, Christ, this is the movie that I made with him. So full disclosure, I am the sound designer in it. And I'm also do the lead voice in it, along with the excellent Ingrid Moon. And then as about halfway through it, I realized, for Christ's sake, Phil did the music for this. So this is an entirely nepotistic choice, but I think that I can make the case for it being a great video, despite the nepotism. So anyway, Pesch, I remember Pesch doing several innovative videos, machinima. Now we're talking about during sort of the height of the machinima golden era. I'm sure Tracy will fill in all the dates and times and places and weather and all of that. But I remember being so impressed with his filmmaking style that I believe, if I remember correctly, I contacted him, which was something that I did a lot in those days. If I found somebody that I was really interested in, and you could do it, it was really easy to do it. So I contacted him and I said, I want to work with you. And he said he's got this script called The Days After, a science fiction piece. So he sent it to me and I just loved it. I thought it was truly innovative. And he shot it in Grand Theft Auto. Which one was it, Phil?
I think it's San Andreas.
San Andreas. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, but completely unlike any visual metaphors that you can imagine. The characters are somewhat blocky, but that was the state of the 3D model creation in those times. So we worked together and I contacted Ingrid Moon because it's about, the story is essentially very simple. It takes place in a post-Holocaust world in which people have gone into tribes. That's sort of a trope of science fiction. And one of the tribes are people that have gone to the very top of super skyscrapers. And this is the story of a guy who's gone to the top of a super skyscraper, and he's become very sort of philosophical in his view of himself and also He finds the light, the wind, the sky, and everything is interesting. And he's visited by a younger woman who comes, and they become close. And they make the most extraordinary choice to solve the hopeless situation that they're in, which I won't spoil for you. But it's the kind of thing that you just never see in a mainstream movie. So, to make a long story short, we worked on it together. I did several versions of the script, and I wanted the voice. I didn't want to do that whisper thing that so many actors do, where they go into this. You see actors do that, and it's just such a phony. Audiences buy it, but it's just such a phony thing for me. But I did record my. I had a little closet studio in those days when I was living at another address. And I got up very early in the morning, like at dawn, to do the recordings. So my voice would have that lower pitch and also have that cracky sound to it. It would crack and you just get very interesting quality to my voice, which is normally a tenor voice, as you can tell from listening to this. So I sent him several of them. He loved it. And he started putting it together. And by the way, Ingrid and I rehearsed several times at my place. And it was such a treat working with her. She's not a particularly skilled actress from her background because she hasn't done a lot of acting, but she responded really well to coaching. So we really came together on some interesting stuff, and I was really happy with how it turned out. And I just adored doing the sound effects for it because it was just so interesting a project. Now, at this point, I can't remember, Phil, whether I contacted you about doing the music for it. Do you remember?
Yeah. So I can't remember you didn't contact me to do the music, and neither did Andre, but it was you that reached out to me. And I don't remember if it was just that you were excited about the project and wanted me to see it, or if you had you and I used to consult each other quite a bit in those days on sound stuff, on how to do this, and does this turn out right, and things like that. So it may have been that. It may have been, hey, I want a second opinion on the sound mix on this. And I was just swooned by the film. And I actually brought up, and it was probably initially through you, but then to Andre as well, I said, the writing in this and the execution this is something that would actually have a chance in like a festival setting. It has that feel. I said, but the problem is you've got copyrighted music, and that's gonna give you problems for this film down the road. It may not right now, but this was before YouTube had kind of figured out how to handle that stuff, right? So not only for distribution on YouTube, but if he wanted to enter it into any festivals, I already knew from experience that, hey, you can't do that and just use, music off your favorite CD or something. So I just mentioned it to him. I says, look, that's going to be an issue. And I volunteered to score it for him. And basically just says, I think I could come up with something. I'm hearing something here that's great, that fits very well with Ricky's narration, with the sound. And I think I could put something to this that would really do it justice, and you'd have no copyright worries whatsoever. Would you let me try that and see if you like it? And he did. So that's how I got involved. Yeah. Yeah.
The music is just fantastic on it. I think we went through one or two iterations of it. I remember giving you some notes. You remember?
Yeah, it kind of evolved, and there was kind of some negotiation on, hey, let's pull it back here, because obviously if there was full volume score through the whole film, none of your sound work would have mattered. So we worked that out through negotiation, which I think is how it's best done,
Yeah, I think so
too. Back and forth, and hey, let's pull this back here and this up here, and things like that.
Yeah. So and then when we finally finished it and the film came out, it was well received by the public. I think it won an award. Tracy will give us all of that background. But I just thoroughly enjoyed working on this film. And then having put it aside for so many years and coming back to it, I was even more impressed when I watched it again.
Yeah, it holds up very well.
It just is such a fascinating and interesting film with gosh, it's hard to talk about the ending without giving it away, so I won't. But I can tell you this, it is one of the most original and anti-commercial endings you could ever imagine for an animated film. So that's my report on the film and why I selected it, because I thought I could give some interesting background information on it, and Phil could contribute, but also because I thought it was representative of the kind of work that wasn't generally being done. If you compare this to something like Red versus Blue, which is nakedly commercial, despite its benefits, this was the kind of thing that wouldn't succeed in a commercial environment, and I admired that. And other people were making works like this at Machinima's prime period, and I just wanted to show you one of the films that was very special to me.
Yeah, I'm glad you did, because I one of my, not fears, but just something that I try to hopefully help us all as a community guard against is forgetting works like this. You know, there's such a volume of material and movies and frankly noise on the internet and stuff, and this is a gem. It really is. We've talked about several times on this show how writing can make or break a piece, and I think that this is a great example of that. That you can look at this, and if you look at it on a surface level, you get caught up in, oh, gee, the animation's so primitive back then and the figure's so blocky. It's like,
doesn't make any difference.
Just listen. And it's just wonderfully written. And your performance, Ricky, was just inspired. And honestly, I wouldn't have come up with what I did come up with is probably my favorite piece of film scoring that I've ever done for anyone ever. But it wouldn't have been there without that writing and what he did do with the visuals, that fog, and the ending that I found very disturbing and still do. Even though I can see that there's a beauty in it. But I was rocked by the ending. I think that's probably the intended effect in some way, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
Yeah, the score just happened like it was just there. It was really just me dictating it. It just came out. It was right off the page, if you will, of the film that you guys had already been constructing. So it was relatively effortless. Like I don't know how I would go about analytically approaching, hey, I'm going to score something like that again. I don't know that I could, you know. It really just literally was, I just had to get down what I was hearing. And I love that, you know.
Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that fascinating how when your focus is on something other than what it is with the actual work, the actual stories and people and place that you're talking about, you tend to have something that isn't very deep. It tends to be somewhat on the surface, and that works out fine. People are crazy about that kind of thing in popular circles, but somehow the people who make it aren't as excited or happy about the work as those who have this connection. That somehow the story and the place and the time and the colors and the sounds inspire a group of people to come together to collaborate in a way that they wouldn't if they were all working off of a crib sheet, you know, a laid out story form that is, you know, constructed in order to sell.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened here.
And it's wonderful, the atmosphere that this film evokes, and some of the basis of the plot. It's like you watch this and it's hard to believe that this was done in 15 or more years before COVID. Because the reason that they're up on the skyscrapers is that there's been a plague, you know, that it's, and that's not a new idea, and it wasn't new then, you know, but this was just a wonderful take on it. And yeah, it's kind of hard to believe that this whole notion of the tribes who occupy the roofs of buildings, that's not like some Philip K. Dick short story no one's ever found or something, you know? It's got that kind of oddity and weirdness that yet is rooted in a plausible, believable world situation, you know, that the world has fallen apart. And when I first saw it, it evoked for me the same feeling that I got the first time that I watched. Oh, there was a slew of movies in the late '60s and early '70s that were dealing with this everything falls apart notion. Omega Man with Charlton Heston, the
Yeah.
original.
Yeah.
To a lesser degree, Soylent Green. Movies from that period where it's just the world there's recognizable elements, but it's strange and decayed and it doesn't look like it's going to end well for the world, right? That there's someone's hit the reset button on the planet, and this is that, like, condensed into this just beautiful little
Gem.
morsel, Yeah, just it's wonderful. And that would be true of this story and the voiceover if even without any of the visuals and even without any of the music. That's so it goes all the way deep to, like, it's the origin, the idea, and the brevity of the dialogue, the efficiency of the dialogue, or the narration, forgive me.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you can really slap almost anything on that and it's still going to be great. But the fact that he was able to pull out of San Andreas something that looks like that I have no idea how he achieved some of that, like that.
Neither do I.
That particular type of fog and the way he did the camera, even the opening titles. This is a film that was made by someone who loved what they were doing, and it really, really comes through. So, yeah, this one needs to not be forgotten. This movie's part of the Machinima collection, by the way, which is way back in the day, a couple years after this film came out. Ricky and I and Ingrid, and I don't remember who else was involved over time, but basically Jason Choi was originally part of it. That's right. And it was kind of an archival project to, hey, something in us knew that we need to snare this stuff and keep it somewhere safe and preserve it, like almost like a time capsule, because YouTube is blowing up, and not knocking red versus blue, but that was the more common and more popular content, and it's like all that noise is going to drown out art like this. So I'm really glad we did that. And even though the site isn't still running, we've still got the collection of films. It's up, and as long as I'm around, I'm going to keep it up somewhere. And this is one of those films. If you're interested in more work from this, let's call it a golden age of artistic machinima, that collection's a great place to start for sure.
Yep.
So I remember when this film was released, and Ricky, I think both you and Ingrid contacted me saying, you really need to watch this. But I think I'd already seen it at that point because I'd seen it on the... Yeah. But it was... I remember being so blown away by the story and the very bleak world that it portrayed. I'm not going to spoil the ending either. But it definitely hits harder after having lived through a pandemic than it did when I first watched it. And Ricky, some of your characters' thoughts about, how do they name this virus? I remember in the early days of COVID having very similar thoughts of who named it COVID-19, and the more technical names for it that were being thrown around at the same time. I thought, well, I don't know who designs all this stuff. So those kind of things are very relatable to watch it when I was watching this again. It's definitely not an easy film to watch, but that's the point. And I enjoyed watching it again. It was such a good film. And Phil, you said something about things being blocky and everything, but the way to look at it now is it's a stylized style of animation. It's not photorealistic. And when you try and do photorealistic machinima, it ages badly because photorealism progresses so quickly. But if you're going for that cartoony look, it doesn't matter so much because that will persist for longer.
Yeah, isn't that funny how that works? That Andre made this film look this way because, like Ricky said, that was pretty close to as good as you could get. It wasn't maybe the best that was available at the time, but it was a standard for sure. Yeah. But nowadays, if someone were to make a film that has for lack of a better phrase, a limited palette on purpose, it would be admired for that, right? So it is interesting if your focus is on the tech, you're kind of missing something important there. Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, and something I've been thinking about over the course of making this show is when we look at some of those older machinima films, they still hold up if they've gone for the cartoony look because, well, it's just like a stylized cartoon. It doesn't have to be realistic. But Ricky, I'm glad you didn't choose this film early on when we were making this show when we were still living through the end of the pandemic, because I don't think we could have watched it comfortably.
Would have been even harder, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think enough time has passed now that you can watch it and it's still a very powerful film without making you feel like I don't want to be watching this at all. So yeah, this is an excellent film to bring back. So thank you.
Well, I've never seen this before. I didn't know you made it. No. So I came at this completely fresh.
Oh.
And I don't know how I missed it, I'm sure. Or at least if I had seen it, it hadn't stuck. So my thoughts are kind of fresh and very, very similar to what you've all been saying, actually, which probably no surprise. I mean, my first immediate thought was how prescient it is. What a terrifying and yet strangely euphoric tale of what happens in the days after a pandemic has wiped humankind out, leaving only a few survivors. And I like the reflection, actually, that this then evoked in me because we've lived through that. So obviously, and I've got two different takes on it, and I'll share both. I think obviously there's a literal, T40X virus take, which I think is a really interesting perspective and timely because, of course, we have nothing now if not a warning after warning, frankly, of what happens during and after pandemics. I mean, COVID being the most shocking of all. But before that, there was AIDS, which caused similar shocks to society during I want to say 80s and 90s, and certainly late 80s, early 90s. And then SARS in certain parts of the world also, a great shock from that. And more recently, we've had Ebola and Mpox. And now we're currently going through the H5N1 bird flu, making its jump between species again. So, these kind of pandemics are absolutely horrific. And they, I think few things, though, have done to humanity what COVID did on a global scale. And I think really what the living memory for most will be that lived through that will be the enforced lockdowns. That'll be the abiding thing that folks remember. And I think what's so interestingly told in this, that it foretells that situation. Although evidently these weren't necessarily mandates and choices made by the characters in the film, or didn't seem to be. So what's compelling, I think, is in this particular short is the fear of loneliness, the evidence of isolation, and what happens when you do even accidentally come into contact with other people, and how between you can manifest these kind of constructed responses in your kind of unique perspective of whatever it is you're experiencing. And then question whether or not it ever really happened at all, because you've lost your grip on reality and all the things that are around you. And I suspect having, because that to me was exactly what played out on the social platforms during all the lockdowns. Folks continually losing that sense of reality. I mean, even now, people that I know talk about lost years. There's 3 years there where they just don't have the memory of them at all.
Yeah.
And what you've captured in this short is what those. Well, that's. I mean, it's so contemporary in what we experienced. It's the perfect portrayal of it, and yet so many years before it actually happened. But I also think there's another perspective, and that's perhaps maybe a unique to you perspective, Ricky, and maybe not literal, and it's possibly not even what you were thinking when you made the choice here. But you could also reflect on this in relation to pretty much any life-altering event. And I wonder if this selection isn't influenced because of what's been happening in LA recently, those awful fires, devastating the environment, changing it from everything that you recognized and having to be prepared to leave somewhere you are familiar with to somewhere else. Well, kind of almost, I suppose.
I didn't think of that. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, that was another thing that kind of crossed my mind. And then I thought, well, actually, what this could be is pretty much anything that's life-changing. Then I mean, a virus is one thing, but of course it's not the only kind of disaster that has this kind of impact. These natural disasters, war, all of these things can kind of create this kind of disorientation. And you say that in your narration. You say something like war, crime, patriotism. You can name those things, but you can never fix them. And I thought that was such a powerful line.
That's just a delicious line.
It's a cracking line, isn't it? You could just think about that in any context that is playing out for us right now. And then I was thinking about, there's, you're not normally known for your sentimentality, Ricky. And I was thinking, well, the names of these characters, it's actually a little bit of sentimentality there with reference to Bogart and Ingrid. I'm guessing Casablanca-ish.
Sure. That's the first thing I thought.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And then again, the LA reference and the fires and what have you. And I was thinking, well, GTA San Andreas, what else would it be in?
Yeah.
So I think it's very timely to be discussing a film like this, even though it's nothing to do with today, but something that you created.
I want to remind you, at the end of Casablanca, they walk out into the fog.
They do indeed.
At the end. And in a way, they parallel that in the short film Days After.
Well, I was going to say, in terms of the editing and the aesthetic style, the fog, the black and white or grayed out, whatever the filter was or color it was, and the way that the characters are presented is really interesting. I really actually, the way the characters are blackened out, it's like this virus has made people shadows or ghosts of themselves.
Fascinating.
And when the two characters interact, I don't know if you picked up on this as well, but they became more coloured. It was like they had then facial features, which I think was a really interesting way to convey what this horrific virus has done to them, and how bringing people together creates a different colour to the scene.
Well, in a sense, they recapture their humanity a bit.
Indeed. And just by that little use of colour at that point, real craft has gone into that. I think that's brilliantly done.
Yep.
I think the music design was really interesting as well, because the atmospheric nature of it was really well done. I mean, it really conveyed the sense of fear, and at times almost this kind of, we're winning over this virus. There's almost kind of a conquering vibe to it, and a euphoria. And I found, I don't know if you heard this sound of gulls. I heard sounds of gulls.
I put that in.
Did you?
Yeah, that was Ricky.
I thought that was strangely comforting, if not at odds with what you actually see on the screen, because it kind of feels like there's a sense of survival over the odds.
Well, I wanted it to be so ambiguous that it might possibly be interpreted as coming from his mind, from his memory, as opposed to being real gulls that high.
Okay. Well, I think for me what it conveyed was hopefulness. primarily through the connection of the characters, but those goals also conveyed a little something there as well. Um, I think, yeah, I when I was looking up the background of this, it was evident there had been an original release of it, and I didn't know because I saw him comment on or some comments on the fact that you'd seen a pre-release of this and that it had been taken down because of copyrighted music. I wondered what
Yep.
the original music was for
I
it.
can't remember. It wasn't.
It
It
was
wasn't
a
anything that I
rockish.
recognized. But yeah, it was more
It
rock.
was a
Yeah.
sort of Euro rock,
Was it?
a little
Okay.
space rock to it, but it had a kind of more rhythmic, more driving rhythm to the whole thing. And it actually worked quite well.
Yeah, I
thought.
was going to say it was not a bad fit at all.
That's
Yeah, it
interesting. So,
worked.
so Euphoria was the intention then, by the sounds of it, the sort of because I don't know whether to reveal this bit or not, but to me that ending was euphoric, but not in the way that I was expecting it to be, and certainly, certainly, I guess you kind of well without it's difficult to actually really comment
Yeah,
on
it's
it.
hard to talk about it without giving it away.
It's ambiguous, shall we say? Let's put it
That's a
put it as
good word.
I like the ambiguity of it because I like the bit where you're not sure whether it's the virus that has made a decision or the people.
Let's do this. Folks who are listening to this, if you don't want
Pause.
to know what the ending is, then stop right here and then come back and listen to it after you've watched the film.
Good
But
idea.
we really need to talk about the ending specifically. So this is going to be a spoiler.
I think
from
we've
here
given
on
enough
in.
warning. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Trace.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, the fact that these guys just sort of, connect and then decide to end it, I just really didn't see that coming. I don't know why, because
End it by jumping off of the huge
building.
high-rise skyscraper together
Yeah.
at the,
Well,
at
or
the
do
same
they?
time.
Or do they? Is that, and then I was thinking, well, they obviously decided to do that. And then I was thinking, actually, that because of the way they seem to be saying they were embodying the virus, maybe the virus made, I don't know, that ambiguity about the ending was just as
Is the
intriguing.
ambiguity is the ambiguity simply because we didn't actually see them fall?
Well, he doesn't have the reverse shot. He has
Right.
them running towards the camera, but he doesn't have the reverse shot of them
Yeah.
going over the edge.
Because to me, it's heavily implied that they do. But
They
you're
do.
right; they don't actually. There's no Hans Gruber from Die Hard falling.
Yeah.
100 stories. There's no scene like that
Yeah.
to confirm it. So
I
I
don't
guess
think-
I guess one could say that you could hope against hope that they didn't. But then my thought is, all right, so
No.
where are they getting their food? This is probably why it's not a Philip K. Dick story, right? Because there's certain things. It's like, how were they eating?
Yeah.
No plant life. There's no animals up there. But it's one of those things where it doesn't matter for this
Yeah.
because it's
No.
not
Yeah.
the point. This isn't
not
a
the
survival epic. It's
Right.
it's
Well,
more of
I
someone
think-
coming to terms with a situation, I think.
Well,
Oh,
it's
no.
ironic because you have these two people who have experienced an absolute disaster, a world disaster, and they're in despair and they've lost their sense of being connectedness and being human. And then they find it, and there's a romantic element to it as well. And their decision after that connection is to stop their lives.
Yeah.
That's just audiences. If you played this to a mainstream TV audience, or if it was done as a film, they'd get up and rage at the screen.
But you know what?
Well,
I liked the fact.
One other thing I want to add to that before we move too far away from that is the way that I came to understand it was, what is for many people one of the biggest fears, and that would be dying alone. Living alone is one thing, and that's rough, and isolation is really hard on a person, on any person, even a psychopath. Eventually, isolation will get to them. But for most people, living alone is hard, but dying alone is terrifying. So in a way, I felt like that these two were in despair, possibly for a number of reasons, but possibly also because I'm going to die alone. And now I don't have to. I can go into whatever that is and not be alone. And that's the way to do it,
Yeah.
But it is weird, and it would be very controversial to most audiences, I think, because it's only a hop, skip, and a jump away from that line of thinking to some kind of justification of murder-suicide, right? And that's not what the film's trying to do at all. This is more of, this outcome is pending and inevitable, and it's a choice of how are we going to face it.
We're going to choose our own time.
We're going to choose it. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's weird to say that that's romantic, but that technically is what it is.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, it's a bit Thelma and Louise, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when I watched it, and I don't want to make light of COVID when I say this, because obviously that was a horrific time. Millions of people didn't survive it. But I found myself wondering, if COVID had been worse, to the point it was similar to this film, would I have made the same choice as these two characters? And I don't know the answer to that.
Well, you won't, because until you're confronted with the situation, because otherwise you'll have to imagine it.
Yeah.
And our imagination is not a substitute for actual reality.
That's true. But it did just get me thinking about that. Would I do that? And yeah, you're right, Ricky. I wouldn't know until the time comes. And thankfully, COVID wasn't as bad as the virus in this particular video.
Well, that's one reason why science fiction and filmmakers and storytellers love those life-changing, world-changing moments, because it puts people in a situation where they have to make choices that are unavoidable. And they have to make it from their true selves, not because they're trying to impress someone else, or whether they're trying to follow some sort of social habit or a social trope. They're making it because that's what they want.
Yeah. I heard a lecture by a clinical psychologist once, and he had a very interesting take on this notion that basically the reason we have thoughts are so our ideas can die so we don't have to. And I feel like to some degree that's part of science fiction's conceit, is let's look at this unthinkable and horrific and situation because it's safe to do so. We can do so and not die.
Yes.
Because the only other way to experience it, like you were saying to Damien, is to be there. Well, that sucks, There's no happy ending on this story, right? There is no happy ending. So,
well,
anyway,
unless you look at it in the sense that what's real anyway.
Yeah.
And how do we know?
Well, I think a fall from a super high-rise building and your impact on the concrete below would be considered a real thing.
But you wouldn't know anything about that.
I would, right up until the moment of impact.
Yeah. But you certainly wouldn't be conveying it.
That's actually just got me wondering, what if Ingrid isn't really there?
Oh,
no, that's cool. Yeah. I take it she is, but it's an interesting thought, right?
It's a very interesting thought.
Especially with what we discussed about what isolation does to someone. Yeah.
That's right. And I think that's a tribute to the excellence and art of this short film, that we have so many things that we can imagine and think about, and it gives so many different impressions by its clever use of ambiguity in the story.
Absolutely. Well, of course.
Do we know what Andre went on to do?
No, I've
had a tough time keeping up with him over the years.
Yeah, no, I've looked him up. I cannot find anything. I wondered if you did. But what I did want to say before I close my bit is that this one, the German bit film Festival Best Machinima Movie in 2006. And that same year, later on that same year, it was nominated in the Best Machinima Film category for the National Museum of Photography, Film and Television's BAF Awards, which I'm guessing is US based.
I'm not sure.
Or maybe UK based. Either way, it was incredibly successful, and a real testimony to the quality of the work that you all did on it. I could find nothing about Andre, so I don't know what
he was a slippery fellow, and I'd like to give you a little piece of information that we might be able to close on. And that is, I was so moved by the world that Andre Pesch created that I showed it to my partner, Lisa, who's a professional writer. And she liked it enough. And I said, can you imagine a sequel to this? And she went away. And about a week later, she came back with a script for a sequel to this. Now, her take, I know you look on your faces, sequel, the two leads die at the end. Well, her idea was that the two main characters of this story were misinformed, and they made assumptions about the plague, and the plague wasn't nearly as bad as they thought it was, and that in the time they were on the top of the high rise, there had been major improvements in people's lives, and the virus had been essentially conquered. So she says, why not a story of young punk kids who are still enjoying the chaos down below, but don't have to worry about the virus anymore? So the scene opens with these four kids led by this wild ass woman who are trying to break into places to get stuff. And then out of the blue, these two whomps occur near them. And those are the two people from the previous story. And they go over and they're like going, holy shit, look at this. Oh, man, what is that? And then the girl says, they jumped. Well, what do you mean they jumped? They jumped because they're so fucking stupid. And then the story goes on from there.
Wow. Did that ever get made?
Well, here's the thing. I was really excited about this story. It had a lot of potential. It was a bit different in style from the original,
right,
but incorporated it in very original and unique ways. And Lisa's a very good writer, so the dialogue was very tight. So I sent it to Andre, and it took him forever to reply. And he says, well, yeah, maybe, So being a dumbass like I am, I just assumed that he was interested, but he didn't like the idea of turning over the writing control of the story. So I kept after him, and I even came up with some examples and character designs and stuff like that, trying to get him on board, and he eventually just faded away.
So this was a while ago.
Oh, yeah, this was the year after this movie came out.
2006, 7 then.
Yeah. And
wow.
A couple of years later, I tried to contact him again about it. No response. So I thought you guys might find that interesting.
That is interesting, yeah.
That's definitely a very unique way to make a sequel, and I like it.
Yeah. What a shame.
Yeah. I think Andre could have done something with this, but personally, I think he just liked the idea of exploring this one story, and he didn't want to go further in telling the story. But
and who knows what else was going on in his life and career and all that. And I'm not even certain what age he was when he made this, so who knows. But I sure have missed his voice. Even if it wasn't a sequel to this film, I sure would have loved to have seen him make something else. But he seems to have been satisfied by this experience and just moved on.
Yeah. I did look at his channel up, and there's nothing that's been on it for sort of 18 years kind of thing.
Right.
No, I think he did what many others did, is they moved away from machinima to other things. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but at least he got to tell one good story, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you're going to make one and only one,
this is it.
Hard to do worse than this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty phenomenal.
Great that you are all in it. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
all part
Didn't
of
you
that.
recognize my voice at the beginning?
Well, you got a great accent going. I did recognize your voice, of course I did, but you'd you sounded very in character.
Yeah, I sort of made him a middle Western kind of guy with harder R's,
Yeah.
like an everyday kind of Joe. Like if this happened in St. Louis or Detroit.
I think my favorite thing about this whole thing is that you found this movie and had to watch it to realize that you had helped make it. That's just delightful. That is delightful.
That's so Ricky, isn't it?
We have been at this a long time for that to happen.
Yes.
That is awesome. Well, I'm glad you found this film, Ricky.
I was just
it's
gobsmacked, What the hell?
Wow, this is really good. I wonder who made. Oh,
It's me.
Well, thank
great.
you, everybody. I'm glad you liked your choice. I'm certainly glad that we were able to share it with everybody listening. Well, that's our show today. Unless you guys have any final thoughts you don't want to add. Okay, great. Now, if you know anything about Andre Pesch, if you know about his life or any of the other films, if you've done some research, if you collaborated with him, please contact us at talk@completelymachinima.com. We'd like to know more. Or if you're just interested in what we have to say and you have a comment, send it to us. We do read them. I'm got my tongue in my cheek, but we do read them and we take them seriously. So thank you guys for another interesting show, and appreciate your comments and your thoughts. We'll see you again next time. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.